Millionaire marries a fake bride for his mother's dying wish. But what happened next was unbelievable. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the sterile hospital room. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic, and every sound seemed amplified in the suffocating silence. On the bed lay a frail woman, her breathing shallow, her skin pale. Tubes and wires surrounded her like a web, but her eyes, weak yet burning with determination, were fixed on the tall man standing at her bedside. This man was Daniel Ashford, a billionaire known for his ruthless business strategies and his cold, untouchable demeanor. To the outside world, he was invincible, a man who could bend entire industries to his will. But here, in this stark white room, he was nothing more than a son watching his mother slip away. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Daniel, before I go, promise me. I want to see you married. I want to know that you will not be alone in this world." "Oh, bye." The words struck him like a blade to the chest. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight, his entire body stiff with resistance. Marriage was not part of his plan. He had no bride, no fiancée, not even a woman he trusted enough to pretend. Yet the desperation in his mother's voice made his carefully built walls tremble. "Mother," his voice cracked for the first time in years. "Please do not ask me this. I cannot." Her frail hand reached out, shaking, barely able to touch his sleeve. Tears welled in her fading eyes. "Daniel, it is my only wish. Let me leave this world knowing you will not face it alone." He swallowed hard, fighting the storm raging inside. Outside these hospital walls, he was the Ashford Empire's untouchable heir. But here, before the woman who had given him everything, he felt powerless. Her life was slipping like sand through his fingers, and the one thing she asked of him was the one thing he could not give. When the doctors ushered him out moments later, Daniel stumbled into the cold night air. The city lights blurred, neon streaks against his unfocused gaze. His mother's voice echoed in his head like a haunting melody. "Promise me, married." Anger and desperation surged through him. He wanted to scream at the universe for its cruelty. How could fate demand such an impossible task? But in that storm of emotions, one ruthless solution began to crystallize in his mind. If he did not have a bride, he would create one. Not with love, not with romance, but with the one thing he trusted above all, a contract. A contract that would buy him time, that would give his mother the peace she longed for. A contract that would bind a stranger to him in the role of wife, if only for a few months. Daniel pulled out his phone, his voice low and sharp as he gave instructions to his assistant. "Find me someone. Discreet. Someone who can play the role. I do not care who she is, as long as she is convincing." As the call ended, his reflection in the black screen stared back at him, a man who had built empires on logic and power. Yet tonight, he was making the most irrational decision of his life. Somewhere in the city, a young woman was about to have her fate rewritten. She was not born into wealth, she did not know the rules of the elite, and she had no idea that a billionaire's desperation was about to crash into her fragile world. And for both of them, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Daniel Ashford sat in his towering glass office overlooking the city. The skyline gleamed with the morning sun. But inside the room, the atmosphere was cold and heavy. His assistant, a man who had worked under him for years, stood stiffly with a file in his hands. "We have found someone," the assistant said cautiously. "She meets the requirements. Young, discreet, and most importantly, desperate enough to accept the arrangement." Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp with determination. "Bring her to me." Across the city, in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper, Emma Carter sat at the edge of her bed, clutching a hospital bill in her trembling hands. Her younger brother lay in the next room, recovering from yet another medical procedure. The debt was crushing, and every day was a battle to keep food on the table. When the knock came on her door, she opened it to find two men in tailored suits. They handed her an envelope with a summons. Confused and fearful, she followed them, not knowing her life was about to be bound to the coldest man she had ever met. Inside the Ashford office, Emma felt dwarfed by the marble floors and glass walls. Daniel studied her as though she were an object, not a person. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, clutching her worn handbag tightly against her chest. "You need money," he said without preamble, his voice as sharp as ice. "I need a wife. Not a real one, only in name. 6 months. You will play the role until my mother passes peacefully. When it is over, you will leave, and your debt will be erased." Emma blinked, stunned. "You cannot be serious." I do not joke," Daniel replied flatly. He slid a document across the desk. The contract gleamed under the light, its clauses neatly printed, binding and unyielding. "Sign it, and your family will be free. Refuse, and you walk away with nothing." Her heart pounded. The weight of her brother's medical bills pressed down on her chest like a crushing stone. Her pride screamed at her to walk away, but her love for her brother whispered otherwise. Her trembling fingers picked up the pen. Daniel watched without emotion as she scrawled her name on the line. To him, it was a transaction, a deal no different from any merger or acquisition. But to Emma, it felt like she was selling her soul. The assistant collected the papers and nodded to Daniel. The deal was sealed. "From this moment forward," Daniel said, his voice as cold as marble, "you are Emma Ashford. You will live in my house, appear by my side, and you will obey the rules. Discretion is everything. If you falter, if you expose the truth, the contract will be void, and the consequences will be yours to bear." Emma's throat tightened. She forced herself to nod, even as her insides churned with fear. That night, a black car pulled up to her apartment. The men packed her few belongings into the trunk. Emma stood in silence, as the city she had always known disappeared behind tinted windows. The gates of the Ashford estate opened like the mouth of a beast waiting to swallow her whole. The mansion loomed in the moonlight, vast and intimidating, with windows glowing like watchful eyes. Every step she took toward the front doors felt heavier than the last. Inside, the halls were lined with priceless art and polished marble. Emma felt the weight of history pressing down on her, as though the house itself judged her unworthy. And then, she saw him again, Daniel, standing at the top of the grand staircase, his posture rigid, his gaze piercing. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. Neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled only by the echo of her hesitant footsteps. Emma Carter had entered as herself, a woman burdened by poverty and responsibility. But from tonight forward, she would be Emma Ashford, the fake bride of a billionaire. And in this house of wealth and secrets, every breath she took would be a lie. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Ashford mansion, casting golden light across the polished marble floors. Emma sat at the long dining table, her posture tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Before her was a spread of breakfast fit for royalty, freshly baked pastries, fruit cut into perfect shapes, and steaming coffee poured into delicate porcelain cups. Yet she could not bring herself to eat. At the head of the table sat Daniel, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit, even though it was barely 8 in the morning. He read the newspaper with an air of indifference, his face half hidden behind the pages. He did not acknowledge her presence, not with a greeting, not even with a glance. The silence stretched unbearably. Emma shifted in her chair, the sound of her fork against the plate, far too loud in the cavernous dining hall. She felt like an intruder in a world she did not belong to. Finally, she dared to speak. "Good morning." Daniel lowered the newspaper just enough to reveal his sharp blue eyes. "If you intend to stay in this house, learn the rules. Appearances matter. You will conduct yourself with grace, not hesitation." Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She pressed her lips together and nodded. After breakfast, she was escorted by one of the staff to a wardrobe room larger than her entire apartment. Racks of designer dresses lined the walls, each worth more than she made in a year. The housekeeper explained that these would be her new clothes, chosen to fit the image of Daniel's wife. Emma's fingers brushed the fabric of a silk gown, her chest tightening with unease. When she emerged later, dressed in one of the elegant outfits, Daniel was waiting at the bottom of the staircase. He looked her over with a cool, assessing gaze, as though she were a product being inspected. "Better," he said simply, before turning away. The day continued with more lessons. A private etiquette coach arrived to instruct her on posture, table manners, and the subtle art of moving in high society without exposing her humble roots. Emma tried to absorb every detail, but her head spun with the endless rules. Forks for each course, how to hold a glass, how to walk into a room without seeming intimidated. By evening, Emma felt drained. Her body ached, her pride bruised by the constant corrections. Yet what weighed on her most was Daniel's silence. He never raised his voice, never displayed anger, but his cold indifference cut deeper than cruelty. Later that night, Emma found herself wandering the halls of the mansion. She paused before a door slightly ajar and stepped inside. It was Daniel's mother's room. The elderly woman lay propped up against pillows, her breathing shallow but her eyes warm as they landed on Emma. "You must be Emma," she said softly, her voice frail but kind. "Come closer, dear." Emma hesitated, then approached the bedside. The woman's thin hand reached for hers. "Thank you for marrying my son. He has lived so long with walls around his heart. You are giving me peace, knowing he will not be alone." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. For the first time since signing the contract, she felt the crushing weight of the lie she carried. She wanted to confess the truth, to tell this kind woman that it was all a charade, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she squeezed the woman's hand and whispered, "I will do my best." Behind her, she felt Daniel's presence in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the sight of Emma holding his mother's hand. For a fleeting second, the mask of indifference slipped, replaced by something he quickly concealed. Emma left the room with her heart racing. She had entered the mansion as a fake bride, a pawn in a cold contract. But tonight, with his mother's fragile fingers still lingering on her skin, the stakes became painfully real. And for the first time, Emma began to fear not just the lie itself, but what would happen if her heart betrayed her role. The following days settled into a rhythm that felt both suffocating and surreal. Emma played her role as the billionaire's wife, rehearsing her smiles, adjusting her speech, and hiding her trembling hands whenever the staff looked her way. Yet every moment carried the heavy reminder that she was living a lie. Daniel maintained his cold distance. At breakfast, at social gatherings, even in the car rides to public events, he spoke to her only when necessary, his words clipped and precise. Still, Emma noticed the way his gaze sometimes lingered, as though he were studying her, measuring her resolve. One evening, they attended a charity gala at a luxury hotel. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, the air filled with the murmur of wealthy guests and the clinking of crystal glasses. Emma stood at Daniel's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she had been instructed. But the whispers began almost immediately. "Who is she?" A woman in diamonds sneered softly to her companion. "She does not look like old money. She is nothing but a climber," another man muttered. "I give it a month before he discards her." Emma felt the heat rising to her cheeks. She forced her smile to remain steady, but her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to disappear into the ground. Daniel, however, heard every word. His jaw tightened, but he did not flinch. When the remarks grew louder, he suddenly slipped his arm more firmly around Emma's waist. With a voice that cut through the noise, he said to the group nearest them, "Allow me to introduce my wife, Emma Ashford, and she deserves more respect than anyone in this room." The crowd fell silent, their smug smiles wiped away. Emma froze, stunned. For the first time, Daniel's words were not cold, but protective. He guided her away from the stunned guests, his touch steady, almost reassuring. Later, in the car ride home, Emma stared out the window, her thoughts racing. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. Daniel's eyes stayed on the road, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Because you are my wife. Whether this marriage is real or not, no one has the right to humiliate you." Her chest tightened, and for a moment she forgot the contract, forgot the rules. All she felt was a flicker of warmth in the man she had believed was made of ice. The next day, Emma returned to Daniel's mother's room. The older woman's condition had worsened, her strength fading with each passing hour. Emma sat beside her, brushing her hair gently and reading softly from a book. The woman smiled faintly, whispering, "You are good for him. I see it in his eyes." Emma's throat constricted. She wanted to scream that it was all a facade, that she was not the savior his mother believed her to be. Yet when she glanced up, she saw Daniel standing silently in the doorway again, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity she could not decipher. That night, as Emma lay in her luxurious bed, sleep would not come. Her thoughts spiraled with confusion. She was trapped in a role she had agreed to play, but the lines between truth and pretense were beginning to blur. Every time Daniel defended her, every time his mother held her hand with gratitude, her heart betrayed her with dangerous hope. For Daniel, the contract had been a solution, a shield against his mother's final wish. But for Emma, it was becoming a cage, one that pressed harder with every beat of her heart. And as the days turned into weeks, the mansion that once felt like a prison now became the stage for a conflict she had not anticipated. The conflict between duty and desire, between the lie she lived and the feelings she could no longer deny. Emma Carter, the woman who had walked into the Ashford estate as nothing more than a desperate sister, now stood on the edge of something that could either destroy her or save her love that was never supposed to exist. The weeks passed, and with each public event, Emma's role as Daniel's wife grew more complicated. She learned to wear the gowns, to walk with poise, to smile at reporters' questions without betraying her nerves. Yet beneath the surface, her heart was at war with itself. Every glance from Daniel carried a weight she could no longer dismiss. Every word of defense, every moment of silent protection, made it harder to remember that their marriage was built on a contract, not love. One evening, Daniel announced that they would attend a black-tie gala hosted by one of the Ashford family's oldest allies. The ballroom was filled with chandeliers and music, laughter echoing off golden walls. Emma walked in beside Daniel, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She felt every eye in the room on her. Whispers rose like smoke. Some marveled at her beauty, while others sneered at her background. Midway through the evening, as the orchestra played softly in the background, Emma found herself cornered by a group of wealthy socialites. Their smiles were sharp as blades. "You have done well for yourself," one woman said, her voice dripping with condescension. "From what I hear, you were barely scraping by before this marriage." Another added with a cruel laugh. "Tell us, Emma, how does it feel to go from counting pennies to wearing diamonds overnight?" Emma's chest tightened, her pulse racing. She forced herself to stand tall, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "I may not have been born into wealth, but I know the value of hard work and dignity. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy character." The words silenced them, though their eyes still burned with disdain. But before they could strike again, Daniel appeared at her side, his arm wrapped firmly around her, and his voice carried across the group. "Enough," he said, his tone commanding. "You forget yourselves. This woman is my wife. She deserves your respect. If any of you cannot offer that, then you are not welcome in my presence." Gasps rippled through the group. Daniel rarely raised his voice in public, yet here he was, defending her without hesitation. Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion, her heart pounding wildly. The gala continued, but the mood between them shifted. When the music began again, Daniel surprised her by offering his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Emma hesitated, her breath catching. "You do not have to." "I want to," he interrupted, his eyes holding hers. On the dance floor, under the glittering chandeliers, Emma felt the world blur away. His hand rested firmly on her back, guiding her with a grace she did not know he possessed. Their eyes locked, and for a fleeting moment, it felt real, not a performance, not a contract, but something fragile and dangerously true. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's lips curved slightly, though his tone remained measured. "Because for the first time, I am not sure where the act ends and the truth begins." Emma's breath caught. Her heart betrayed her with a painful, exhilarating thrum. She knew she should look away, remind herself of the rules, but she could not. The song ended, and the applause of the crowd broke the spell. Yet as they left the dance floor, Emma knew something irreversible had happened. The lines of their arrangement had blurred beyond recognition. That night, as she lay awake in the vast bedroom that still did not feel like hers, Emma pressed a hand to her chest. She had entered this marriage as a desperate sister, seeking to save her family. But now, she feared she was becoming something more, something she was never supposed to be. And deep down, though she would never admit it aloud, She wondered if Daniel felt the same, because in his eyes that night, she had seen not the cold calculation of a contract, but the dangerous spark of a man beginning to fall. The days following the gala felt different. Emma could not erase from her mind the way Daniel had held her during that dance, the way his words had brushed dangerously close to confession. She told herself it was all an illusion, a side effect of the role she was forced to play. Yet every glance between them seemed to carry unspoken weight. But just as Emma's heart began to betray her, new storms gathered on the horizon. One afternoon, Daniel called her into his office. He sat behind his desk, his expression serious, a document open in front of him. "There are rumors," he said flatly. "The press has begun to question your background. Some claim you appeared out of nowhere. Others suggest you are hiding something." Emma felt her stomach twist. "What are we going to do?" "We will maintain the facade," Daniel replied, his eyes hard. "You will not falter. No matter what is said, you will remain composed. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, though fear gnawed at her chest. She had lived her life in shadows, never imagining that the spotlight of the elite world would shine directly upon her. That evening, the pressure became painfully real. They attended a dinner party hosted by one of Daniel's business rivals, a man who thrived on manipulation and scandal. The atmosphere was heavy, every word laced with hidden meaning. Midway through the evening, a striking woman entered the room. Her presence commanded attention, instantly tall, poised, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Emma recognized her from whispers among the guests. This was Victoria Hale, a powerful heiress and Daniel's former fiancée. Victoria glided toward them with predatory grace. "Daniel," she purred, her eyes flicking dismissively to Emma. "You did not tell me you had married." "What a surprise!" Daniel's jaw tightened, but his tone remained polite. "Victoria, this is my wife, Emma." Victoria's gaze swept over Emma like a knife. "Your wife," she repeated slowly, her lips curling. "Interesting. Forgive me, Emma, but you seem terribly unprepared for this world. I do hope you are not overwhelmed." Emma forced a calm smile, though her hands clenched beneath the table. "I am learning quickly," she replied softly. The conversation moved on, but Victoria's presence lingered like poison in the air. Throughout the evening, she made subtle jabs, questioning Emma's education, her upbringing, even her manners. Each remark drew polite laughter from the surrounding guests. Daniel remained silent longer than Emma expected, his expression unreadable. But when Victoria's words grew bolder, "I suppose Daniel has always had a taste for charity projects." His patience snapped. He placed his hand firmly over Emma's, his voice low but sharp. "That is enough, Victoria. You will not insult my wife again." The table fell silent. Victoria's smile faltered, though her eyes burned with fury. The rest of the evening passed tensely, but the damage was done. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. Emma could feel the weight of every stare, every hushed remark. By the time they returned to the mansion, her chest ached with the burden of humiliation. In the quiet of their shared home, Emma finally broke. "Why did you not tell me about her?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Daniel met her gaze, his own eyes clouded with something between anger and regret. "Because she no longer matters. What matters is that you remain strong. Do not let her or anyone else see you falter." Emma turned away, her throat tight. She wanted to believe his words, but doubt gnawed at her. Victoria was not just a rival, she was a woman who knew Daniel's past, who knew the world Emma was desperately trying to survive in. That night, as Emma lay awake, she realized the battle ahead was no longer just about pretending to be Daniel's wife. It was about survival in a world determined to tear her down. And with Victoria Hale now circling like a predator, Emma knew the lies holding her marriage together were closer than ever to shattering. The following week unfolded like a nightmare. What had begun as whispers at the gala now erupted into full-blown scandal. Headlines splashed across newspapers and online sites, questioning Emma's past, her sudden appearance, and whether her marriage to Daniel was nothing more than a calculated lie. Emma sat in the mansion's study, her hands trembling as she scrolled through article after article. Some claimed she was an opportunist, others insisted she was hiding a dark past. One headline screamed, the mystery woman who stole the Ashford fortune. The sound of the door opening made her flinch. Daniel entered, his expression grim. He took the tablet from her hands and set it aside. "Do not read that trash." "How can I not?" Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "They are tearing me apart. They are tearing us apart." Daniel's jaw tightened. For the first time, she saw the cracks in his armor. "This is what they do when they cannot control me. They go after the one thing they believe is my weakness." His eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. "You." Before Emma could respond, the butler appeared at the door. "Sir, madam, there is something you should see." They followed him to the sitting room, where the television blared with breaking news. On the screen stood Victoria Hale, her poised figure framed by flashing cameras. "I think the world deserves the truth," Victoria declared to reporters. "Emma Carter is not who she claims to be. She is no heiress, no society lady. She is a fraud. This so-called marriage is nothing but a contract." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The room spun around her. She felt exposed, stripped bare before the entire world. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. She will regret this. But Emma's heart sank with dread. The lie they had built together, the contract that had bound them, was no longer hidden. It was now a weapon in the hands of their enemies. That night, Emma sat alone in her room, staring at the contract she had signed weeks ago. Her name glared back at her in bold ink, the symbol of a bargain she had once thought was her salvation. Now it felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, "What have I done?" Outside her door, Daniel lingered in the shadows, his face unreadable. For the first time in his life, the empire he had built seemed fragile, and the woman he had sworn would only be his wife on paper had become the center of a storm that could destroy them both. The scandal spread like wildfire, and within days, the Ashford mansion was surrounded by flashing cameras and reporters hungry for more. Emma could barely step outside her room without feeling the weight of 1,000 judging eyes. One evening, as the pressure mounted, Daniel found her sitting by the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red from crying, but her chin was raised with quiet defiance. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "You cannot let them break you." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "It is not just me they are hurting, Daniel. They are using me to destroy you, and I cannot be the reason your empire falls apart." For a long moment, Daniel was silent. Then he stepped closer, his gaze steady and unflinching. "Listen to me. I built this empire with my own hands, and I will not let anyone take it from me. But what they do not understand is that you are not my weakness." His hand brushed against hers. "You are my strength." Her breath caught, her heart pounding with emotions she could no longer deny. But before she could respond, his phone rang sharply. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "It is the board. They want answers. They are demanding I address the media tomorrow." The following day, Daniel stood before a wall of flashing cameras, microphones crowding the podium. The press shouted questions, their words sharp and merciless. "Is your marriage a sham? Did you marry her under contract? Was she paid to be your wife?" Daniel raised a hand, silencing the chaos. His eyes found Emma standing just beyond the crowd, her hands trembling as she watched. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice firm, echoing through the room. "It began as a contract." Gasps erupted. The press exploded with noise, reporters scribbling frantically. But Daniel's next words cut through the uproar like a blade. "It began as a contract, but it will end as the greatest truth of my life. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing her as an obligation. I stopped seeing her as a deal. I saw her as my wife. And I love her." The room fell into stunned silence. Emma's eyes filled with tears, her heart shattering and mending at the same time. Daniel's gaze never left her as he finished. "I do not care what this costs me. I would rather lose everything than lose her." In that moment, the empire of Ashford shook not because of scandal, but because its powerful heir had chosen love over pride, truth over lies. The fallout from Daniel's declaration was immediate. The media storm raged louder than ever, but the narrative began to shift. What was once a scandal now became a love story too bold to ignore. Headlines read, "Billionaire chooses love over empire," and "From contract to commitment, the Ashford marriage." Inside the mansion, Emma struggled to process it all. She had braced herself for ruin, for Daniel to cast her aside in order to protect his empire. Instead, he had stood before the world and chosen her. That night, she stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights. When Daniel joined her, she whispered, "Why would you risk everything for me?" He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Because without you, all of this means nothing. The contracts, the money, the power, none of it matters if I cannot share it with you." Tears welled in her eyes as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the ring he had once given her as part of the contract. This time, there was no paper binding them, no signatures, no conditions. He held it out to her with a sincerity that shook her to her core. "Emma Carter," he said softly, his voice breaking, "will you marry me for real? Not because of an agreement, not because of appearances, but because I cannot imagine my life without you." Her breath hitched, her heart overflowing with emotions she could no longer contain. She covered her mouth, tears streaming freely as she whispered, "Yes. Yes, I will." "Oh." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger once more, but this time it carried no weight of obligation, only love. He drew her into his arms, holding her as though the world outside no longer existed. Days later, the Ashford mansion was filled with joy rather than whispers. The staff smiled openly, and his mother, though frail, witnessed the vows exchanged once more, this time not forged by desperation, but by choice. As Emma walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like starlight, Daniel's eyes never left her. When he took her hand and spoke his vows, his voice trembled with truth. "I once asked you to sign a contract. Today I ask you to sign your heart to mine, forever." The guests rose to their feet in applause, but Emma heard nothing except the thundering beat of her heart and the man standing before her. And so, what began as a lie, born of desperation and duty, transformed into a love story that defied every expectation. Emma Carter, once a woman crushed by poverty, now stood not as a pawn in a contract, but as the wife of a man who had chosen love over everything else. The empire remained, the world still watched, but in that moment, all that mattered was the truth they had both fought for. A truth written not in ink, but in love that could never be erased.